My ruthless husband brutally attacked my 7-year-old son from my first marriage. When I found him, fear filled his eyes, and he said nothing. Desperate for answers, I secretly activated a hidden camera. What I saw left me stunned. My husband's shocking actions were captured on tape. I called the police, but just as they were about to arrive, an unexpected event unfolded that left everyone gasping in disbelief. My name is Lisa, and I'm 37 years old. I live in the vibrant city of Denver with my 7-year-old son, Ethan. My life has been a whirlwind of responsibilities and joys, but let me take you back to how it all began. The moment I thought I had found my perfect partner. 2 years ago, I attended a local business conference focused on green initiatives. I was excited. This was a chance to network, learn new strategies for my role as a marketing manager, and connect with like-minded individuals. Little did I know, this conference would change my life forever. At the conference, I met Brian. He was a successful lawyer for the city, tall with dark hair and a charming smile that lit up the room. He was 47, a decade older than me, but age didn't seem to matter when we started talking. Our conversation flowed effortlessly. He was intelligent and had this warmth about him that drew people in. I remember thinking how refreshing it was to speak to someone who was not only articulate, but also genuinely interested in what I had to say. After the conference, we kept in touch, and soon we were dating. Everything felt right. I thought I had finally found someone who understood me. Brian was great with Ethan, who instantly took a liking to him. They would often play games, and I enjoyed watching them bond. It felt like a family, a real family. Within a year, we decided to get married. Brian moved into my cozy suburban home, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. He was helpful around the house, often picking up Ethan from school when I was caught up at work. "You know, I'm getting good at this parenting thing," he would tease, flashing that charming smile. I laughed, grateful for the support. But as time went on, I started to notice changes, not just in Brian but also in Ethan. My once lively and cheerful boy began to withdraw. He was no longer the giggling child I knew. Instead, he grew quiet and distant, avoiding eye contact and retreating into his own little world. I tried to talk to him, asking if anything was bothering him at school or with his friends, but he would shrug and say, "I'm just tired, Mom." As a mother, those words never sat well with me. I could sense something was off. It became more concerning when I spotted a large bruise on Ethan's arm one afternoon. "What happened here, buddy?" I asked, my heart racing. He shrugged it off, saying it was from a fall at the playground. But my maternal instinct screamed that something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that the bruise was just the tip of the iceberg. That night, as I tucked him into bed, I brushed his hair back and tried to lighten the mood. "Hey, space cadet. Planning a trip to the moon?" I joked, hoping to coax a smile. He didn't even crack a grin, just whispered, "No, Mom." The silence in his room felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I kissed his forehead and left, but I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, thoughts swirling in my mind. I kept thinking about the bruise, about his distance, and about how Brian was behaving differently too. He had started coming home later from work, often lost in thought, his demeanor shifting from warm and caring to tense and irritable. I had to find out what was going on. After a restless night, I decided to take action. I needed to know the truth. I remembered reading about hidden cameras, how they could provide evidence in situations like these. That idea lodged itself in my mind, and I began to formulate a plan. The next day, I purchased a small, discreet camera and carefully installed it in Ethan's room, making sure it was well hidden but positioned to capture everything. I hoped it wouldn't come to this, but the thought of Ethan being hurt filled me with dread. If there's something going on, I'll find out, I told myself, determination rising within me. A few days later, I reviewed the footage. My heart raced as I clicked through the videos, praying for a glimpse of normalcy. But my worst fears came true. There it was, Brian, losing his temper, yelling at Ethan. I watched in horror as he struck my little boy, the sound echoing in the silence of the room. This was not the man I had married. This was a stranger. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt the ground beneath me crumble. How could he do this? My heart ached for Ethan, who had once filled our home with laughter. I wanted to confront Brian right then and there, but I knew I had to gather more evidence first. I couldn't act impulsively. I needed to be smart about this. The next day, I reached out to Jenna, Brian's 21-year-old daughter. I hoped she could provide insight into her father's behavior. We met at a local cafe, and as I sat across from her, I felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. "Jenna, I need to talk to you about your dad," I began, my voice trembling. She looked at me, concern etched on her face. "What about him?" I hesitated, unsure of how to frame my words. "I think something's wrong. Ethan is acting differently, and I'm worried." Jenna shifted in her seat, her eyes downcast. "I haven't had the best relationship with him, you know. He wasn't always the best father." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" I pressed. She took a deep breath, and as she spoke, the truth unfolded. Brian had been abusive toward Jenna when she was younger, a fact she had tried to bury deep inside. It was why she had distanced herself from him over the years. My heart sank further as I realized this man I had married had a history of violence. I knew then that I couldn't handle this alone. I needed a plan. "Jenna, would you be willing to help me?" I asked, urgency in my voice. "I'll do whatever it takes to stop him," she replied, determination shining in her eyes. We began to devise a plan to gather more evidence against Brian, knowing that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and uncertainty. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test my strength as a mother and lead me down a path I never expected to take. After my shocking conversation with Jenna, I felt a mix of fear and determination bubbling inside me. I had uncovered a hidden truth about Brian, and I knew I had to act swiftly. If he had hurt Jenna, then there was no telling how far he might go with Ethan. I needed to gather more evidence to protect my son, but I had to be careful. The last thing I wanted was to tip Brian off and put Ethan in more danger. Jenna and I agreed that she would arrange a meeting with Brian. She had a way of getting under his skin, and I hoped she could provoke him enough to elicit a confession. The thought of her confronting him made my stomach churn, but I knew it was necessary. We decided to meet at the cafe again to finalize our plan. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked Jenna as we sat at our usual table, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow over us. Jenna nodded, her expression serious. "I need to do this. It's time I faced him. No one should have to endure what we did." I admired her bravery, but the fear for Ethan's safety gnawed at me. "Just be careful. We need to make sure you're safe," I cautioned. "I will. I'll record the conversation on my phone," she assured me. "He won't see it coming." As the days went by, I watched Ethan closely, always on high alert. He seemed to sense my anxiety, often asking if everything was okay. I would smile and assure him that all was well, but inside, I was a bundle of nerves. The thought of what Brian might do if he sensed the tension in our home haunted me. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Jenna texted me just before she left to see Brian. "I'm on my way. Wish me luck." "Be safe," I replied, my heart racing as I paced the living room. I couldn't focus on anything else. Time stretched out, each minute feeling like an eternity. I kept replaying the possibilities in my mind. What if Brian got angry? What if he turned violent? An hour later, I received a text from Jenna. "I got him to talk. I'll come over now." My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for her to arrive. When Jenna finally walked through the door, she looked shaken but determined. "I got it," she said, pulling out her phone. He admitted it. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of dread. "What did he say?" I asked, my voice trembling. Jenna played the recording, and as Brian's voice filled the room, I felt sick. "You were too weak, Jenna. I had to show you discipline. And Ethan? He needs to learn respect. Sometimes, tough love is the only way." Listening to those words made my blood run cold. I couldn't believe I had let this man into our lives. "We have to go to the police with this," I said, my voice steadying with newfound resolve. "I agree, but we need more evidence." "One recording may not be enough," Jenna replied, her eyes bright with determination. I nodded, realizing she was right. "I'll keep the camera in Ethan's room and monitor it closely. We need to capture anything else that might happen. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, I couldn't shake the sense of unease. "Do you feel safe, buddy?" I asked, brushing his hair back. He looked up at me, those big brown eyes filled with innocence. "Of course, Mom. Why wouldn't I?" I forced a smile, but inside, I was a storm of worry. I kissed his forehead and left the room, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what was happening beneath our roof. Over the next few days, I kept the camera rolling, checking the footage daily. My stomach twisted with each viewing, hoping for a glimpse of normalcy, but instead, I was met with more of Brian's explosive anger. He would come home late, often already in a foul mood, and I would hear him yelling at Ethan for minor mistakes, like not cleaning up his toys or leaving the bathroom light on. I was horrified. How could he treat my sweet boy this way? I whispered to myself as I replayed the recordings. One evening, after another episode of Brian's fury, I decided to confront him. "We need to talk," I said firmly, my heart racing. Brian looked up from his paper, surprise crossing his face. "About what?" "About how you're treating Ethan. He's just a child," I exclaimed, trying to keep my voice steady. His expression hardened. "You're overreacting, Lisa.
Kids need discipline."
They need to understand consequences."
"No."
"This isn't discipline, it's abuse." I shot back, feeling the heat rise in my chest. He stood up, towering over me. "You don't know what you're talking about. I'm doing what's best for him." The argument escalated, and I could feel the air between us crackle with tension. I had to stay strong for Ethan. "I won't let you hurt him anymore. I'll go to the police if I have to." Brian's eyes darkened, and I saw a flicker of something dangerous there. "You really think that will end well for you?" he warned, his voice low and menacing. I stepped back, suddenly afraid. "I'll protect my son," I declared, though doubt crept into my mind. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what I had said. I was determined to protect Ethan, no matter the cost. The camera kept rolling, and I would do whatever it took to ensure my son's safety. The tension in our home was palpable, and I knew I was on a collision course with the man I had once loved. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was only just beginning. The days following my confrontation with Brian were filled with a heavy tension that seemed to suffocate our home. I kept the camera rolling, hoping to catch something, anything, that would prove his abusive behavior. Each time I checked the footage, dread clawed at my insides. The man I once thought I knew had become a stranger, someone I feared might truly harm my child. Ethan remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around us. He continued to be his sweet, curious self, asking questions about the world and drawing pictures of superheroes. I admired his resilience, but I could see glimpses of unease in his eyes when Brian was around. It broke my heart. One evening, as I prepared dinner, I heard the front door slam. My heart raced. Brian was home early. I quickly glanced at the camera feed on my phone, seeing him storm into the living room. The tension was palpable, and I knew something was about to happen. Ethan, playing with his toys on the floor, looked up at Brian, his face lighting up for a brief moment. "Dad, look at what I made," he said, holding up a crumpled paper rocket. Instead of encouragement, Brian's face twisted in annoyance. "What is that mess? Don't you know how to clean up after yourself?" he snapped, his voice sharp. I felt a surge of anger. How could he talk to Ethan that way? I wanted to rush in, but I knew I needed to gather more evidence. So, I stood frozen in the kitchen, watching the scene unfold through the camera. Ethan's smile faded, and he dropped the rocket. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was just trying to have fun," he said quietly. Brian's eyes darkened. "Fun? You think this is fun? You need to learn some respect," he shouted, his face reddening with rage. In that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed into the living room, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Brian, stop. He's just a child," I shouted, my voice rising above his. He turned to me, surprise flickering across his face before morphing into anger. "Stay out of this, Lisa. You have no idea what you're talking about." "Enough. You need to treat him with love, not anger," I pleaded, stepping between Brian and Ethan. "Love? This kid needs discipline. You're making him weak, he spat back, his fists clenched at his sides. I stood my ground, refusing to back down. No, Brian. You're the one who's weak. Hitting a child is not discipline. It's abuse. At that moment, the room was charged with tension, and I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I couldn't let him continue this way. I'm taking this to the police, I declared, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Brian laughed, a cold, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. You really think that will end well for you? You'll regret this, Lisa. My heart raced as I realized the danger I was putting myself and Ethan in. I'm protecting my son, Brian. That's all that matters. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You'll regret this decision. You think you're the victim here? You don't know what you're asking for. Just then, Ethan, sensing the rising tension, tugged at my shirt. Mom, I'm scared, he whispered, his small voice trembling. I knelt down, wrapping my arms around him. It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe, I reassured him, but inside I was terrified. I could feel the walls closing in, and I knew I had to act quickly. As the night wore on, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. Brian's threats echoed in my head. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I had to protect Ethan at all costs. The next morning, I made a decision. I would gather the recordings and evidence I had collected over the past weeks and go to the police. I couldn't let Brian's abuse go unchecked any longer. When Ethan woke up, I hugged him tightly, determined to shield him from the darkness that loomed over us. I love you, buddy. Remember that, no matter what happens, I whispered, kissing the top of his head. As I prepared to confront the police, I felt a mix of fear and hope. This was the moment I had been waiting for, but it was also the moment I feared most. Would they believe me? Would they protect Ethan? With my heart pounding, I gathered the recordings, my resolve hardening. I was ready to fight for my son, ready to face the monster I had once called my husband. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I knew I had to be brave. For Ethan's sake, I had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The day I decided to go to the police felt like stepping into a storm. My heart pounded in my chest as I held the recordings tightly in my hands, each one a painful reminder of what Brian had done to Ethan. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was doing this to protect my son. He needed me to be brave, and I wouldn't let him down. As I drove to the police station, the streets of Denver felt unfamiliar, almost surreal. I could hardly concentrate on the road, my mind swirling with doubt and fear. What if they didn't believe me? What if Brian found out? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I had to focus on Ethan. I had to do this for him. When I arrived, I parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at the building. The reality of my situation sank in. I was about to report my husband for child abuse. I felt like I was stepping into a new world, one filled with uncertainty, but also with hope. Taking a deep breath, I entered the police station, my heart racing. I approached the front desk, trying to project confidence even as my hands trembled. I need to report child abuse, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. The officer looked up, concern evident on his face. Of course, ma'am. Let me take you to an interview room. He led me down a corridor, and as I walked, I felt the weight of my decision pressing down on me. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, yet it felt monumental. In the interview room, I sat across from a detective named Officer Ramirez. She had a kind demeanor, which put me slightly at ease. Can you tell me what's been happening? She asked, her voice gentle but firm. I began recounting everything, the bruises on Ethan's arms, the recordings of Brian's anger, and Jenna's revelations about her own past with him. As I spoke, I felt the fear begin to lift, replaced by a sense of empowerment. I have recordings, I said, my voice gaining strength. I captured him losing his temper, hitting my son. Officer Ramirez nodded, her expression serious. We need to see those recordings, Lisa. They could be crucial evidence. I handed over my phone, my hands shaking as she reviewed the footage. Watching the expressions on her face, disbelief, anger, and finally, determination, filled me with a sense of relief. "This is very serious," she said, her voice steady. "We're going to take this very seriously." After what felt like hours, I left the police station, my heart racing. I had done it. I had taken the first step toward protecting Ethan. Now, all I could do was wait and hope for the best. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. The police launched an investigation, interviewing Ethan and gathering evidence. Brian was unaware of what was happening, and I felt an odd sense of peace knowing that he was still in the dark. Then came the day I had both anticipated and dreaded. Brian was called in for questioning. I watched from a distance, my stomach churning. Would he try to manipulate the situation? Would he lie his way out of it? When the police finally called me in to discuss their findings, I held my breath. "We've gathered enough evidence to charge him with child abuse," Officer Ramirez informed me, her tone serious but reassuring. "We'll be filing charges soon." A wave of relief washed over me. Finally, I felt like I could breathe. The truth was out, and Brian would have to face the consequences of his actions. As the legal proceedings unfolded, I stood firm. Jenna testified about her experiences, adding weight to the case against Brian. I spoke passionately about the recordings, detailing the fear I had for Ethan. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. I sat in the courtroom, my heart racing as the judge announced, "We find the defendant, Brian, guilty of child abuse." Tears filled my eyes. I had fought so hard for my son, and finally, justice had been served. Brian was sentenced to prison, and as he was led away, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a newfound strength. With Brian gone, Ethan and I began to rebuild our lives. We moved into a cozy new apartment, free from the shadows of the past. Slowly, Ethan regained his laughter and joy. I watched as he made new friends and found comfort in his art, creating colorful drawings filled with superheroes and adventure. Jenna also became a significant part of our lives, visiting often. Together, we formed a bond that helped us both heal from the trauma we had endured. Reflecting on our journey, I realized that love is a powerful force. My love for Ethan had driven me to confront the darkness, to uncover the truth, and to fight for justice. Together, we emerged stronger, ready to embrace the future, hand in hand. As I watched Ethan play one sunny afternoon, I smiled, knowing that we were free and that I would always protect him, no matter what. We were finally free, and the road ahead was bright with possibility.